Welcome, everyone. Today's episode, The Best Is Yet to Come, Navigating a Career in HR, covers the story of two HR professionals that I've worked closely with and how they navigated the ups and downs of finding their next career opportunity during the middle of a pandemic. I am sure their stories will prove to be inspirational for those looking to explore careers in HR. We talk about first jobs, how they got into the world of HR, making the decision to make a change, and so much more. Hope you enjoy the episode.
I am happy to be joined by two great guests today. I'm Sam McCarthy with Cordia Resources, and I'm joined by Marley Huckabee, Director of People Success with 10 Pearls, and Erin Kindelan, who is the Head of People with Lovelytics. Thanks for joining, guys.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's they have been very gracious, and I'm very happy that they've decided to do this. It's our journey into this different medium. As I was thinking about figuring out a topic for this, or what's most important, I think what people out there want to listen to, in my role and working mostly in the HR space, and I am a recruiter. I am in talent acquisition, but in a very specialized role, being able to work with both candidates and clients on human resources and talent acquisition specific roles. And one of the things that comes up, and is since almost 2 years now, since COVID-19 has been a part of our lives, is the HR profession, HR people, human capital. That world has changed a lot over the last 2 years. And Marley and Erin both went through changes, job searches, highs, lows, and are now in new positions. But I wanted to have them on because they're very, their story, I think, can be a catalyst for those of you out there who are looking for a job, and both through the pros and the cons of that search. So that's this particular episode. We'll focus on that. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how human resources and people looking for a role in the HR profession specifically are a little bit different than in other parts. So I want to kick this off a little bit of a more lighthearted topic. I want to know, each of you, what was your first job? Obviously, it was not in human resources. What was your first job? And did it have anything to do with what you're doing right now?
So I thought about this question because I knew you were going to ask it. The truth is, my first job was I was a key holder for a tanning salon, which, if anyone can see me right now, you clearly can tell that I go to tanning salons all the time, right? Yeah, that was it was a really interesting experience. It has absolutely, I mean, I think I grew some people skills. At the same time, it has absolutely nothing to do with what I do today. But I will say a job right after that was a server at a restaurant, and I was picked to be a corporate trainer for that restaurant. And I think that was when I really decided that I like to coach people, and that's a lot of what I do today. But certainly did not know, like in college, that I was going to do HR. I thought like I'd be a vet or a lawyer, and look at me now. So it's
wow. Well, and that's Erin, by the way. That was Erin talking. Marley, how about you?
Yeah, so my first job in high school, I worked at the Tasty Freeze in Cabot, Arkansas. And I was on my resume, though, for college, I called myself a grill operator to make myself sound fancier, but it was really like serving burgers and fries and milkshakes and having to learn the system. And you learn a lot about people, both the people you're working with and the customers, especially in a small town.
Yeah, well, interesting. I actually I've worked a lot of random jobs. I've never worked in food service, and you both mentioned that, or in that world. I've worked in kind of hospitality adjacent things, retail, but have never worked in food service. And I know I'm definitely in the minority, because almost everyone at some point in their life does that. And it has to. There are some people who probably did that, and it's, as Erin mentioned, being around people and dealing with challenges when it comes, whether you're managing people or just dealing with customers. I can imagine that there's definitely some correlations there. My first job was I worked at a grocery store called Giant Eagle, which is known in Western Pennsylvania and in Pennsylvania in general. And I think I worked part-time, and I like stocked shelves and just did random, kind of work around there, whether it was sweeping or kind of, that kind of work. And I think part-time when you're 16, it was a good job. I did some other things in my, I think right after that I worked at Radio Shack, which, have you guys ever been to a Radio Shack before?
Yes.
I thought it died.
I mean, it does, it probably isn't, it doesn't exist
anymore.
anymore, but I did do that for like a summer or something. Oh my gosh. But yeah, so that, yeah, it's interesting to see when did you both, was it in college? Was it right afterwards when you thought that, like, when did you first become aware that human resources, that's big, broad term, was a thing? Like, when do you remember when that happened?
Yeah,
Marley?
When I went to college, as a freshman, the degree I wanted to do was music, entertainment, and marketing. And the head of the program was my roommate's father. And so we were having lots of conversations. And I think that he kind of started steering me towards the business school, particularly in human resource management. We had this new degree, and he was like, you're asking, all these questions that are more geared towards people related things. And we have this really cool degree called human resource management in the business school, where you can focus on compensation and benefits and all that fun stuff. So I switched my major freshman year, and it's been HR ever since.
Erin, how about you?
Yeah. Well, similarly, I was very interested in like film and music. And I can't even tell you when I realized HR was a thing. But I was a communications major that turned into an interpersonal communications major. And in some of those courses, like the professor would bring up, oh, this is what human resources does. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. I still don't think that it was necessarily what I thought I was going to do. At that time, and even right after I graduated. But so I didn't, my degree was not in HR, but I think that what I learned related to it enough that I was like, okay, I can apply this to this role when I was searching for jobs outside of college.
And I think most people's very rarely, I look at resumes all the time, and very rarely does anybody have especially an undergraduate degree in human resources. I think unless you go to such a big school that it is really specialized, it just doesn't really happen. People come into human resources from all over the place. And what's interesting is you both have the term people in your job titles now, as opposed to human resources, which I think is a good thing. I think some of the archaic, really old misconceptions about what human resources professionals do, it's good to get away sometimes from that title. It can have negative connotations in certain organizations, right? So I love that you both have that in there. So as I mentioned, you both at the beginning of what your life looked like at the beginning of, let's say, March 2020. I hate framing everything around COVID, but we have to. Your lives look different now than they did then. And they might have looked different whether COVID-19 was around or not. But Marley, I'll start with you. You moved, you lived somewhere else. You moved to the DC area. You had a job here. You left that job during COVID, and you have a new job. Talk about just at a high level, your experiences in being in a role and going through that job search in the last year?
Yeah. It's so funny because I feel like my previous job at my previous company changed so much during COVID. Like COVID became such an important topic to our organization. We had largely most of our employees were on site in hospital settings. And so we did not have like a fully remote or hybrid work model. So contact tracing and FFCRA leave and all of this stuff became a really big deal. And so that became a huge part of my job, which I do think led to some HR burnout, which, if anyone's in the HR space, this is all over the place because we are experiencing the burnout from adding more and more and more to our plates with less and less and less resources. And so last summer, I decided to really start taking a hard look at like what was my future like in this role and with this company. And made the personal decision to leave. And I was one of those people in the Great Resignation that chose to leave without having anything lined up. Yet I was an HR professional. So it was like super unique because I was the one giving advice or trying to retain people. And here I was choosing to leave and take a couple of months off. And so I left my last day was in September, and I took a couple of months off to just breathe for the first time in 10 years, not actually having a job. And it was a really great time.
And I know that's you mentioned when we talked before that you don't take for granted that you were able to do that, right? Where if you had a little bit of a cushion or you were able to go for a few months and be able to dive deep into a job search, what were some of the things that we could probably go down, talk for 4 or 5 hours about all the stories you had interviewing and all those different things. But what are some of the positives that you learned or that came out of those kind of 2, 3, 4 months?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam, you did bring up a really good point. I think it's really important to bring up the privilege that's involved in being able to take a couple of months off. I was in a very unique position, and knowing, I can't predict my future, but I have a feeling I'll never be able to do that again. One day, when you have a family and lots of obligations, you're not going to be able to just take a couple of months off. So I took that in stride and do recognize that privilege, and am very blessed by that. But as far as kind of what my learnings were, I decided to be really, really picky in the job search, which meant it was a very long and arduous process in the way in which I would approach the hiring managers, the hiring team. It was almost like I had nothing to lose, so I could be really my authentic self and ask the really tough questions about, how do you measure performance and what is your, metric system, and, asking the D&I questions about, well, if you have great, female presence in your employee base, how many of them are in leadership, and asking really hard questions, and was able to weed out several employers that I knew just didn't align with my values, both personally, ethically, and from an HR perspective, trying to find leadership that was wanting HR involvement, right? Wanting very smart people, business professionals that knew what they were talking about to come in and really help with employee engagement and retention and professional development. And so I had some crazy fun stories. Like I had one sales director essentially say like, oh yeah, I ask people in interviews how much money they make. And I know that may be illegal, but you do you and I'll do me. And as long as we get along, it'll be fine. And I was like, well, he made it really easy for me to say like, thanks, but no thanks. So that's just kind of one example of what I went through.
Yeah, I mean that's wild. It's things were moving so fast and still are. Sometimes it's funny how authentic people can be. It can be a really great thing. It could also be a detriment. Erin, how about you? And I know you had a similar, I think some similar some correlations to what Marley talked about.
Yeah, my story is pretty similar. I mean, I had a little kind of two situations in the last year, so a little bit different, but yeah, I took an opportunity that I thought was going to be the right one for me, and it wasn't. And so I left around the same time as Marley in September. And my plan was to take some time, which I ended up technically doing. But I was actually really surprised by how quickly things moved. And I think that kind of, I don't know, the experience was so different from any other experience that I've had in a job search before, where I was like, okay, I'm going to take a week or two off and just like really try to clear my head and figure out what I want. And instead it was like, I took a day off and then it was interviews already. And I understand how privileged I am that was my experience. But at the same time, I think that is probably one thing that I did wrong in the experience, and something that I learned was, okay, I really needed that time. Don't jump into these conversations, because I had the opportunity to take the time without being paid for a little while. And I, kind of let my anxiety like overshadow that and just take every interview. And it was really overwhelming. And so I think, it was very different. And I think being in HR and like interviewing is also a really different experience, because a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time you're interviewing at companies that they need you, right? And there's a reason that they need you. Whereas like someone in marketing, there's a reason that they need them too, but like their role is maybe not going to affect the people in the organization as much. Certainly it's going to affect the business, but like we're going into a situation, they're like, we don't have HR, or we don't have these processes and policies, and the people experience is terrible. And it's like, okay, so like, do I go into that situation because they need me? Or is it like, we hear, I think, a lot of different things that maybe others don't hear in the interview process. And it's really interesting.
Well, and I think you probably, as you guys went along, felt more empowered to be able to ask those questions that a couple of years ago, if you're interviewing, you didn't. I mean, you have job seekers right now have a lot of leverage. And especially if you both mentioned, like, you can apply for 10, 20, 30 positions, feel like you're a good fit. And sometimes the ones that you think you're the best fit for, you don't hear back from anybody. And then the ones that you think maybe a stretch, or that you aren't interested based on the job description, are a great fit. So it's a crazy time, but you both mentioned that things moving really, really fast. And did you also experience things moving too slow, where you thought it was great, you got maybe you had 2 or 3 interviews, but that took place over the span of 2, 3, 4 weeks? Did the opposite also happen?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's funny what you were just mentioning, because I feel like Erin and I, we both have years of experience under our belt, but Erin, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but there were a lot of times I felt like I had imposter syndrome. Like I was like, well, who am I, to like, and it takes a lot of, I think, gumption and like grit to get those rejection emails, or to find out, oh, they went with a different candidate. Like, even though you have all of these years of experience and you're a hot commodity on the market, those little things still hurt, even when you are experienced. Like, it's not like I'm fresh out of college and don't know what I'm talking about. And so it was hard. And like, there was a 1 or 2 weeks, and it would be like a really, really crazy day with lots of interviews, or a really slow down day where you would just get like 6 or 7 rejection emails from the 8 jobs you just applied to the night before, and you have nothing lined up. And that's kind of when the scary set in, like the anxiety of, oh shoot, I'm eventually going to need money again. Like, was this the right call for me to just leave my job without having anything lined up? And I think one of the things that I kept coming back to was, I left my previous employer because my values did not align with theirs in terms of the way HR was structured, ethically, all of that fun stuff. And so I kept having to go back to my checklist and be like, okay, what are like the core things I'm looking for? And then what are the ancillary nice to haves that really won't move the needle for me? And having to keep going back to my list and being like, all right, this is the list I'm sticking with. And it was tough, because, you sometimes feel like, well, who am I to say that I want all these things? And the good thing is, you will never find the perfect job. The perfect job does not exist, but it's finding the right one for you for that time being.
Yeah. Yeah. And
definitely,
I'm sure
the humility is really real in this, in this process. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure as you mentioned, you are interviewing with people who either are going to be your peers or going to be, or you may report to, or may be at a higher level than you, but they're really upfront about the
Or
struggles they have with,
they may be reporting to you, right? Like
or
they're
that
interviewing,
too.
they're like, you might be my future boss. So it's
Mhm.
hard.
They're going to tell you the good, but you're also going to hear the bad, and you have to weigh, right? Talk with people, someone within sales or marketing or product or something, and you're going to have to weigh all the challenges that you're going to come into with all the positives that the organization can bring in the long term, which is really difficult. And you both are now working with, and I know Tim Pearl's and Lovelytics are relatively new, or not, if not new, changing or growing companies that are in a very specific space where these are not huge companies that have been around for 100 years that everybody knows about, where you're coming into a really regimented role where you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you're going to come and show up at 9 and leave at 5. Virtually, and then be done. It's going to take a lot of that grit and initiative and some of those things that live in that ambiguous environment. But you both are kind of attracted to roles like that, right? I mean, you've both worked for some places that have had that. Is that something that where you like that responsibility and that accountability, Erin?
Yeah, I do. I think, and I think that's something that I also have to, like, it's a personal thing that I have to work on, is being able to like put my trust in other people when it comes to the people process and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I like the idea of being able to be innovative and be the one that is able to push things through and make changes, and whether that's on my own or with a team. I love to get input from others, but it's I think I thought, okay, let's not do that type of role again, and then I find myself in it, and it's like, sometimes I feel like, am I torturing myself by like continuing to do this? But I love it and I thrive in that kind of environment, and so for the foreseeable future, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. One of the things that you both had mentioned previously when we were preparing for this was kind of having to network in a different way than you had before. And I would say in my experience doing this for the last 3 years, HR professionals aren't always going to be the number one person in your organization you think about when you're networking, right? It is sometimes an uncomfortable thing to do. And you both were kind of doing it virtually, right? You were reaching out to people, you were talking to people in this setting, whether it was on phone or video. Did the networking that you were doing and whatever that looked like, to try to get your name and your resume and your experience in front of people, did you like that? Did it come naturally to you, or were those some of those skills learned that you probably a few years ago would have made you uncomfortable? Marley, what do you think?
I don't love networking. I'm not going to lie. It was a struggle because I have been the recipient of so many of those random LinkedIn messages where like they want to buy, they want to offer their services. It just feels inauthentic. And I never wanted to be that person. But when you are a little desperate and you're finding a job, you will do the craziest things. And so I would do that late at night, when I'm on LinkedIn, I would be like, I'm going to message like the head of HR at Atlassian and just see if they'll message me back. Right. So I did a lot of that and I did get some hits. Like it was actually really cool. I joined like a Microsoft webinar on people and found someone in the chat and then connected with them on LinkedIn. We had an hour phone conversation. We were in the same boat. And so I think while it didn't necessarily, like the networking did not actually get me the job I have right now, I made friends in the network. Like I did not feel like an island. I knew that I had other colleagues that were going through the same experiences as me. So it validated how I was feeling in this really hard process that I thought would have been easier. And I think I learned a lot about how we are all kind of going through the same thing and it can feel alone if you're not reaching out and getting guidance and getting help and just saying like, I have nothing to offer you. I just want to like meet you and learn about what you do. And some of them you will hit it off. And then some of them you won't. Like I had a couple of them where it was like a 7-minute phone call and we just didn't connect. There was just nothing to really grab onto. But then I had a call, with someone else and they're like, we want you on our podcast. This is great. And so I do think that it was helpful because I probably would not have done it otherwise. I hate to say.
Erin, how about you?
Yeah, I think I did things a little differently this time as well. I worked really closely with you, Sam, and Cordia. So I have, obviously I know you because of that in the past, but I think way more heavily did I work with recruiters and network with them. And it probably would have worked out, if I had decided to take other opportunities that I didn't take. But yeah, in terms of, I reached out to a lot of companies and, HR leaders or CEOs so I just moved out of the city. And so in my new area, reaching out to them because I'm like, okay, this could be a good market for me. And like the commute's not bad, but I could still see people in person. Not very successful in that. I think maybe in a small town too, like, LinkedIn wasn't as helpful for me, but I totally agree with Marley. Like I had one person that I was really excited to talk to and I got connected to them and like the conversation, it was like, okay, we're not vibing. This is not gonna, this is not helpful. And it didn't go anywhere. But I ended up reaching out to, the CEO of my company and that worked. So, it's weird and uncomfortable for me too. And I don't really enjoy networking either. But I feel like in this day and age too, you got to do something to get what you want,
Yeah, no, great insight there. You both had some similar experiences. And I think one of the things I tell candidates, don't, if you're going to do that, if you're going to reach out to somebody cold like that, personalize it. We all have people that solicit us for things all the time. Find a connection. You can tell really easily when someone's making it personal as opposed to just the regular kind of message that gets sent to everybody. So you're right. You're still only going to get maybe 1 out of those 10 people to get back to you, or 2 out of those 10 people, but you just never know where that's going to go. And those connections can be worth it long term. And the other thing is, I every time I talk with a client about what they're looking for, and they say, we want to hire this particular person, I'll say, there's 2 things. One, resumes are going to look different than they did a couple years ago. And people like both of you who left a job or left who will leave a job for a multitude of reasons, there are going to be holes in people's resumes. There's going to be people are going to take risks on things that aren't going to end up being a good fit. It's happened to me in my career before I'm doing what I'm doing now. And when you're joining companies that are growing and are in that stage, it doesn't always work out, and that's okay. You should be, for everyone who's listening, take a risk. You should be applauded for doing that. It doesn't always work out. That's okay. As long as the communication is there and the transparency is there, it's okay if it doesn't work out. But don't always stay stuck in something that, there's that threshold somewhere where it's like, okay, I should stick this out a little bit longer. If you're there for a few months, Erin, I know you were in a role for a few months. It just may not have been a good fit. That's okay. It might be a good fit for somebody else. But you're worth more. You're worth a lot in the market right now. For, again, everybody who's listening, don't be afraid to go down a path, do the interviews. You're going to learn from it. It might be do that uncomfortable thing that you may have not been willing to do a couple years ago. So, and one thing that Marley, you mentioned, not now, but again, when we talked before, do you want a short answer from both of you on this? You mentioned, Marley, cover letters. You mentioned you created unique cover letters. So is that something you did in the past? Or is that something you've just done recently, and did it pay off at all?
Yeah, good question. It's like the Sure magazine, like I'm probably pro and Erin's probably again. So we have good reasons why. I don't know if it paid off, to be honest with you. I don't know, but it made me feel better to always send a personalized cover letter. And I mastered it to be, I would quickly Google the company. What do they do? What's their mission? I would include the job title and their mission. And then if I had a personal connection, I would mention it. There was one company I applied to that did support for caregivers. Well, I have caregiver experience. So I put that in there kind of as a personal connection. So I like crafted it so that it literally took 2 to 3 minutes. And I thought if anyone ever reads this, they're going to be like, wow, she spent some time like researching her company. Did it pay off? I don't know. Probably not, but it made me feel better that I was at least like trying on every application. And it really didn't take that long.
Yeah. Erin, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I'm definitely not pro cover letter. There were some jobs that I did apply to that I was like, all right, yeah, I have to. I'm gonna do it. And honestly, and this is maybe just a personal belief of mine, but I think it was more industry folk specific industries I would do cover letters for. I think working at fast growing tech companies in my past, like I hate to say it, but there's just absolutely no way we're reading your cover letter. Like you have this skill set, cool, let's have a conversation and like let's learn from that conversation rather than a cover letter. And I've also received so many cover letters where someone's forgotten to address it to the right company. You know what I mean? And it's just like, okay, look. So I typically don't do them. But at the same time, yeah, I think it does work for people. I think it does work. And you just kind of, that's definitely a topic where, people just have their opinion.
I will say though, Erin, you make a good point. There's so much more risk to doing it, right? Because you accidentally include the wrong company name. I had a candidate that recently submitted their resume and their cover letter, and their cover letter was actually a receipt from their therapist's bill.
No, no.
And like,
Oh, wow.
I mean, but here's the thing, I've been a candidate before where I'm applying to 6 or 7 jobs at a time. There's no way I know if I actually uploaded the right PDF from my desktop. Like she will probably never know, but you're right. There's more risk associated with adding more work to the application.
Yeah, and if you're applying at big companies and your resume and your cover letter are going into someone's applicant tracking system, and it's getting read by a recruiter who has a couple of years of experience, and they're trying to fill a role and get your resume in front of the hiring manager. I mean, what are the chances they're looking at it? It's really interesting because it can really pay off for the right thing, or it can be it can feel like it's maybe wasting your time. But your process sounds good, so I know that's a split. That was interesting because when you mentioned that, I was surprised that you were doing that because I just think it's one of the parts of the job searching process that's going away. You both talked about how quickly things are moving. Usually I'm sure very few people are going to mention, oh, I really liked your cover letter, because it's just it's very rare these days. So would love one thing from each of you, and then we'll wrap up here. One thing from each of you that you learned through this process, that whether someone's listening to this and they're a HR or people professional, or maybe they're in a totally different job. What's one thing that you learned throughout this job process that that people can take away for themselves?
I learned it more in this process, but I've also just learned it from, I don't want to say mistakes in the past, but decisions in the past that I've made in terms of roles that I've had, is like really try to trust your gut. You may not have a great conversation with one person, but overall, like the way that you feel about the conversations that you've had, the role itself, I think it's really, really easy to say yes to a job offer when you don't have a job, right? And it's like, or you really want to get out of where you are. And I think that oftentimes it's very rare that our guts are not telling us the right thing. Especially when it comes to this type of thing where you're dedicating your 8 hours, 9 hours, 12 hours a day. I think just make sure to take the time. And if you are torn, make sure to ask the questions, right? Like, don't be scared to be like, hey, can we have another conversation? Because at the same time, you may feel like you're being an inconvenience, but I think that also shows the employer like, okay, well, they actually care about this decision, which I think is also important, especially right now when people are jumping all over the place. So, yeah, that would be one thing that I would urge people to do is just, make sure you're doing your due diligence and listening.
Yeah, ask the questions. Ask the questions. Again, feel empowered to ask the questions. You're in a position of, if you get somebody on the phone, video, you're meeting them in person. Ask the questions. People want you to ask those questions, and they want you to get into the nitty gritty. Don't especially don't accept a job without some of those unanswered things. And again, it's easier now more than ever with the way the job market is. But thank you, Erin. Marley, how about you?
Yeah. Gosh, that was good, Erin. Dang. I would probably say know thyself, like know your core values in and out, be able to speak to them, know your strengths. And I would say have your checklist of like knowing what you want. And I think it kind of compares to, especially if you're in the HR space, whenever you hear hiring managers or CEOs saying like, we want the unicorn. Well, the unicorn doesn't exist because we're all flawed humans, but the same thing is true for an employer. There's no unicorn company out there. So it's making sure that you're not finding the perfect thing, but you're finding the right thing for you. So knowing what you'll compromise on and what you won't, I think is going to set you up for more success. And coupled with trusting your gut. And I also think too, like asking the questions, don't be afraid to ask the questions. There have been times where I've asked questions that were a little uncomfortable. And then when I repeat back to them, oh, so what I'm hearing you say is XYZ, and they catch themselves either rambling or they're not very clear. It really helps redirect the conversation to, well, these are the red flags I look for. And I want to make sure that this is, and so it's, why not ask the questions? Like Erin said, I think it shows them that you're passionate too.
Very good. Well, I know we could probably know you guys have a lot to offer, and we could probably talk.
We're just ramping up now, Sam.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have one other thing that I will ask about, and it might catch you off guard because this is not something that we talked about before. But I'm so curious about both of your thoughts on. Let's call it salary negotiations, or when you go into a conversation, whether we could probably talk about this for an hour. So I'm not talking about whether or not you know what the salary is of the job before you apply, but when it gets down to knowing what you need, or knowing what's going to make you happy, compared to what the actual job is, and what if you're willing to make a sacrifice depending on what that role is. Have you learned? So I'm sure you both have learned something over the past couple of years on what that looks like. And it's probably something nobody enjoys, but do you feel like you're more equipped to deal with that now and handle those conversations than you were a couple of years ago? Erin, how about you go first?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yes, I think that I am more equipped to have those conversations now. And a lot of that just has to do with, well, a couple of things. I think one, understanding the market, but also really trying to remind myself of my worth, which is probably the hardest thing to do. For myself, I'm not speaking for anyone else, but is like, I know what I can do, and maybe this person doesn't know it yet, but like, this is how I'm going to show you, and I will show you. But at the same time, just like I believe that an employer shouldn't lose a great candidate over $5,000, I'm not going to turn down an opportunity where they just can't get there right now for me, when the role fits, the culture fits, the opportunity, the flexibility fits. So I think for me, it really is like a kind of it's a holistic picture of compensation versus, everything else.
Yeah.
So I've certainly, I don't want to say sacrificed the compensation, but I've definitely, not had that be the number one deciding factor for me.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I love the word holistic. There are things that are important to people now that weren't, again, I keep saying a couple years ago, but it's true. I mean, salary was always number one, because most people were either in an office all the time, and there wasn't a lot of negotiation on whether or not you were going to be able to, how many days you're going to be able to work at home, or being able to worry about times during that block of time during normal business hours where you may not be available for multiple reasons, due to things with your family, your personal life. So those were not even that. There was no negotiation done with that. It was pretty much all on salary and not even bonus. So it's just changed a lot. Marley, how about you?
I was going to say yes. And who I've learned it from the most have been candidates. In the unique position being in recruiting, you see when candidates negotiate really well, and then you see when they really suck at it. And so it's interesting because then you can kind of start seeing how the business will respect and try and bend over backwards, and then when they won't. And so I've taken that kind of in my personal tool belt to utilize that as well. And so I've seen, certain tricks where it's, do it documented through email, offer second, third, like if we can't do this, what about PTO, flexing on that, or what about, increasing 401k match, or if we can't do that, what about a sign on? And so it's really trying to say, meeting me holistically at where I was at my previous employer, or I was really banking on at least a 5%. Knowing what you want, I think it comes back to knowing thyself, know what you want and what you're willing to walk away from, and then what you're willing to negotiate for. And I will say too, like I've negotiated in every position I've been in, and I haven't won everything I asked for. And I think that's okay. It's you have to ask for what you're worth, but then again, you also have to realize realistically there might be things that you don't get. Like I'm doing my master's right now, and I asked my company, will you pay for my master's? And they're like, we don't have tuition reimbursement, but maybe you can put that in place when you're here. So I didn't get that, right? But that also wasn't a deal breaker for me, but I wanted to ask the question. The worst answer I will get is no.
Yeah. Well, and once you come into an organization, then you're generally going to know what the compensation is of most people who work at the company. You're going to know where there might be internal equity issues, because all of a sudden with counter offers, and we could probably go down all kinds of rabbit holes here, but you're going to have people who are two people in the same organization who are paid at two different levels because somebody negotiated their salary better, or somebody asked for a raise better, or somebody got a counter offer because they were going to leave. And I know those are challenges at small growing companies where you want to keep your best people, and finding somebody else is going to be difficult, and you're willing to pay, because the path of least resistance is, hey, we're going to keep this person, as opposed to starting from scratch and finding somebody new. So I appreciate the insights there. Thank you both for doing this. I really appreciate it. And maybe
this was fun.
We'll check in maybe 6 months from now or 3 months from now. We'll do this again. Would love to hear how you're both doing in your roles. You've both been there, what, 4? I know maybe Erin a month, like 3-4 months, something like that.
3 months.
And there's the dog. And I think we both started in November, right?
Yeah, I started on December 1st. It'll be 3 months in a week or two.
It probably feels like it's been a year just because it's been so busy.
It is, yeah, kind of does.
Well, again, thank you for doing this. Again, we will chat again soon. And I appreciate everyone listening. If you've made it this far, I love that you did. We're going to try to have these. My goal is to have these come out every 2 weeks. We're going to have all kinds of interesting topics, and not sure what the next one is going to be, but would love to hear if anybody has ideas. Once we share this and put this out on social media and on our website, if you have ideas or things you want to listen to, or people you'd like to have come on here, would love to hear from all those out there. But again, thank you to both Marley and Erin. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. It was fun.
All right. Of course. Talk to you soon.